The German Air Force was mainly equipped with medium bombers, like the Heinkel He-111, during the war, and according to the popular belief they were simply not able to conduct long-range airstrikes. Well, this is not true. In early 1942 the Luftwaffe conducted a spectacular ultra-long-range strike mission, which was basically planned and carried out by enthusiastic amateurs. German Afrika Korps was the German expeditionary force in Africa during the North African campaign of World War II. First sent as a holding force to shore up the Italian defense of its African colonies, the formation fought on in Africa, under various appellations, from March 1941 until its surrender in May 1943. The unit's best-known commander was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. The German Armed Forces High Command had decided to send a blocking force to Italian Libya to support the Italian Army. The Italian 10th Army had been routed by the British Commonwealth Western Desert Force in Operation Compass and captured at the Battle of Beta Fam. The German blocking force, commanded by Rommel, at first consisted of a force based only on Panzer Regiment 5, which was put together from the 2nd Regiment of the 3rd Panzer Division. These elements were organized into the 5th Light Division when they arrived in Africa from February to March 1941. In late April and into May, the 5th Light Division was joined by elements of 15th Panzer Division, transferred from Italy. At this time, the Afrika Korps consisted of the two divisions, and was subordinated to the Italian chain of command in Africa. During the summer of 1941, the German High Command increased the presence in Africa and created a new headquarters called Panzer Group Africa. On August 15, the Panzer Group was activated with Rommel in command. The Panzer Group comprised the Afrika Korps, with some additional German units now in North Africa, plus 2 corps of Italian units. The Panzer Group was, in turn, redesignated as Panzer Army Africa on January 30, 1942. Theo Blech was a German adventurer and plantation owner who had joined the German Air Force in 1939, arriving in his own Messerschmitt Bf-108B Typhoon. The Messerschmitt Bf-108 Typhoon was a German single-engine sport and touring aircraft, developed in the 1930s. It was of all-metal construction. The Bf-108 was adopted into Luftwaffe service during World War II, where it was primarily used as a personnel transport and liaison aircraft. Chad and Fort Lamy had been captured by the Free French in 1940 and was a staging post for the Allied forces. Blech understood the importance of Fort Lamy as a waypoint in the overland transport and communication route from the west coast of Africa to the Nile, as well as an assembly point for Allied operations against Libya. The British attacked Axis ammunition dumps, fuel dumps, radio stations, airfields, and other rear units. Fort Lamy on the banks of Lake Chad was also part of the Royal Air Force delivery route from Ghana to Egypt. Blech proposed the capture of Fort Lamy to safeguard the southern border of Libya. When his suggestions were dismissed, he proposed that he should at least carry out a bombing raid. General Erwin Rommel approved the idea and forwarded it to General Stefan Froelich, the commander of the German Air Force in Africa. The date for the operation was set for the 21st of January, 1942, to coincide with an Axis attack against the British. Sonderkommando Blech was an Axis special unit comprising German and Italian personnel, equipped with a Heinkel He-111 bomber from Bomber Wing 4 with all excess equipment, including the dorsal and ventral guns removed, a Savoia Marchetti SM.82 transport aircraft carrying extra fuel for the Heinkel and Blech's Typhoon, which were to depart from the Oasis of Hun on January 20. The Heinkel crew and Blech were to go on the raid, while the Italian support crew stayed behind. The Sonderkommando flew to Camp 1 or Campo Uno, a remote natural airstrip in southern Libya, which had been discovered in 1935. It was used as the supply base and the Heinkel was refueled by hand from fuel drums. The members of the expedition who were to fly on the operation were Captain Theo Blech, pilot of the Bf-108 Typhoon and raid commander, Franz Bohnsack, the pilot of the Heinkel 111, and his crew. The Heinkel He-111 took off from Campo Uno at 8 o'clock on January 21 but experienced bad weather, contrary to the weather forecast. The aircraft had been loaded with 4,500 liters of fuel, but the weather increased fuel consumption. The navigator had to use dead reckoning and radio stations from which he could get a direction-finding fix. Hours later, he realized that he was more than 160 kilometers off course and ordered a turn to the west and flew along it to Fort Lamy at the confluence of the Shari and Logwan rivers where they join Lake Chad. The Heinkel reached the lake by noon, after which navigation became easier, despite the storm intensifying. At 2 p.m. the Heinkel reached Fort Lamy. Being so remote, the airfield and supply depot had no air defenses. The Heinkel crew could not delay and made one bombing run. The 16 bombs were dropped unhindered on the fuel dump at the edge of the airfield. The French forces were too surprised to fight back and 360,000 liters of fuel was destroyed. The Heinkel was undamaged and turned northwards, but the crew knew that the detour made it impossible to reach Campo Uno with the fuel remaining. The engines were run at the leanest mixture possible to fly as far as possible. Wireless contact with the Italian support crew had been lost on the outbound leg and could not be re-established. At 6 p.m., 260 kilometers short of Campo Uno, the pilot made an emergency landing on a high plateau. Here the wireless operator set up his 3-watt wireless aerial, laying it out on tent poles. He managed to contact a wireless operator at the German headquarters in Benghazi, 1,050 kilometers to the north. The Italian support crew was still out of contact, and 3 days later, Benghazi sent a message that the Italians had been contacted and that they were searching for the Heinkel. On the 5th day, the crew transmitted a signal with the Heinkel wireless, running one engine, with the little fuel that remained, to power the wireless generator. Within the hour an Italian aircraft landed and delivered water and melons to the Heinkel crew. On the next day a Junkers Ju-52 from the Desert Rescue Squadron 1 arrived with more water and fuel. The crew took off for the short journey to Campo Uno, where the Heinkel was refueled, and then the crew flew on to Hun. The attack on Fort Lamy caused only minor damage to installations and few casualties, but destroyed fuel supplies, despite strenuous efforts to save them, reducing the supply of the Free French and the RAF in the region by half. The raid caused to strengthen the anti-aircraft defenses at Fort Lamy and to start hit-and-run operations against the Italian forces in Libya. Sonderkommando Blake continued operations during the first half of 1942. In June 1942 the Heinkel crashed near Kufra after an engine failure. The crew was rescued 4 days later but had to set the Heinkel on fire, and this ended the Sonderkommando's operations. The raid proved the German medium bombers and the Luftwaffe crews could strike strategic targets deep behind the enemy lines, but this experience was not used later in the against the Soviet tank factories. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.